Hi, Carrie Ann here from the Science Booth. Now today we're thinking about something not very nice. We're thinking about a disaster, in fact, and we're thinking about oil spills. Now what do we mean by oil spills? Well, crude oil, which is a huge natural resource, is usually found well within the earth, so we'd have to drill down to get it, and very often we drill down at sea to extract crude oil. Now crude oil is a thick black sticky substance and on its own isn't that useful, but it can be refined and sort of sorted out into different useful products. So some examples might be fuel for your vehicles like cars or trucks, lorries, aeroplanes, and we'd be thinking about things like petrol, diesel and kerosene. It can also be used for other things. We can get gas from it. We can get things like paraffin and wax, and we can also get like thicker substances like tar and bitumen from crude oil as well. So it's a really useful substance. It's non-renewable because we're using it faster than it's made, and sometimes getting the oil and transporting the oil can be a problem. And very often, because this is done at sea, when an accident happens, it makes quite a terrible mess. So we sometimes get oil spills at sea where the oil's being drilled, or we sometimes get oil spills from the tanker, the big ship that is getting transported in. So what we want to do today is we want to have a little think about, well, what happens if there's an oil spill? What might happen to the habitat? And then we also want to think about how we clean it up. It's quite difficult to get oil out of water, and especially if you're at sea and all the water's moving as well. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our oil. Now we can't use crude oil because that's really dangerous. We're going to make our own version of crude oil. So I'm just going to get some oil in here. We're going to use vegetable oil. You can use any oil, vegetable, baby oil, olive oil, anything you want. I'm just going to pour. I'm probably using too much just to give you a demonstration. I'm just going to grab myself a spoon. Now, vegetable oil or baby oil doesn't really look like the sort of crude oil we're going to get at sea, okay? Because crude oil, like I've just said, is black and sticky and horrible. And if you just add food colouring to your oil, it's not going to mix very well because that's water-based. So we're going to add some cocoa. So this is going to smell like really nice oil, actually nothing like what the oil will smell like in real life. So I'm going to add some cocoa to my vegetable oil. I'm going to give it a really good mix. And you can see we're getting something, although slightly brown, looks a little bit more like what crude oil would look like. So we've got our crude oil there ready. You may have to give that another little stir. Now I'm just going to bring the camera down to show you my setup. Well, it's not set up yet, but show you how I'm going to get set up. So I've got a big tray here. You can do this in whatever sort of vessel you want, okay? If you've got a tray, that's really handy. And in the tray, I've got some of the things that might be useful in helping me clear up my oil spill. So I've got some washing up liquid. Just going to take all these out. We've got some twine or string, that might be useful. We've got some small pieces of sponge. I'll just move them for now. We've got some cotton wool. You might not be able to see that very well. Scissors, you don't need to see those. They're not going to help. We can't cut the oil. And I've got some pipettes as well. Now, the first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to set up our habitat to represent the sea, or maybe part of the sea. So what I've got here is I've got a rock, because some creatures, although they live in the sea, they like to get out of the sea. I'm going to pour in some water into my habitat, okay? So you want like enough water to at least cover the bottom of your tray. I've got just enough there, just enough. And then I'm going to add some things into my habitat, okay? I'm going to add some things to represent vegetation. So I'm going to add some leaves. If you live near the coast, you could go and get some seaweed, and that would be a really good representation. I'm also just going to turn off the light because you're getting a little bit of reflection in the water. That's better, and we can still see it okay. So we've got some leaves to represent the vegetation. I'm also going to put some sticks in to represent our vegetation as well. But yeah, if you can get down to the coast, maybe getting your own seaweed and things. I've even got some shells, going to pop some shells in. There we go. So we've got some things that might live in the sea represented quite nicely there. Now, obviously, we're not going to use any animals in this, but I've got some feathers to possibly represent any seabirds. And again, these are just craft feathers, but if you want to go out and get some actual real feathers, there's always quite a few knocking around when we go on little walks in the park and stuff. And then if you've got any sort of furry material or an old teddy bear, you could use that. But I didn't want to sacrifice one of my teddy bears. So what I've got is I've got some pom-poms to represent any animals which may have fur. I'm going to put one of them on top of my rock. I'm going to try and put one of them on top of my rock. There we go. So I've got some furry animals as well. Excellent. So all these different things are representing different parts of the sea. We've got the vegetation, leaves, twigs, etc. We've got some shells. We've got fur and feathers to represent any animals that may have fur. Now, I'm just going to get my crude oil mixture that I made from my cocoa and vegetable oil. Just going to get rid of the spoon. And you don't need a lot. I know I've got a big glass full here, but I'm just going to add a spoonful at a time. So I'm going to add my crude oil into the water. Okay, I'm going to add maybe a few tablespoons, and you can see how the oil and water are already starting to interact. Okay, so oil floats on water because it's less dense than the water. Okay, I'm going to have my oil spill going all over everything. Okay, so there we go. You can put as much or as little in as you like. But bearing in mind this is the oil spill challenge, you might not want to put too much in. Now, this would be all well and good if our oil did just sit like that in the sea and didn't move around too much, but actually the sea is quite dynamic. Okay, so the sea is dynamic, it's going to be moving, and we're going to end up with something that looks a little bit, oh my goodness, look at the mess we have made. Now, your job as a keen scientist and hopefully a keen environmentalist is to figure out how we are going to clean up our sea. Okay, now this happens in real life, and this is a problem that scientists have continually tried to solve over and over and over again. There's lots of different ways to clean up the oil. Okay, we can rope it off with some floating rope. It sometimes gets vacuumed up if it's near to the shore. We can soak it up with different materials. So what I'd like you guys to do is use as many different materials in your house to find out what we could do to try and solve this problem. So for example, we've got sponges. Could that soak up the oil? So you could stick that in. Will it soak up the oil? You can see that it is collecting some of the oil. How about the cotton wool? Would that be better? So pop the cotton wool in, leave that there for a minute, see what happens. Okay, you can see some movement and things happening and things moving around because oil interacts really weirdly with some things. Let's have a little look. And again, we've soaked up some of the oil. Not very much, but some of it nonetheless. Okay, can you contain the oil? How are we going to clean it up? And once you think about cleaning it up, I also want you to think about how on earth are we going to save our little sea creatures? How are we going to get all the oil out of their fur and, oh dear, out of my feathers? And can you see what it's done to the feather? It's all clinging to the feather. It's making the feather look really heavy. and actually affects the birds quite a lot. It prevents them from being as waterproof as they normally are, and they'd find it really difficult to fly. That feather is so heavy now. They'd find it really difficult to fly and really difficult to move around in the water with that thick, sticky layer of oil on. Let's have a look at our leaf. Our leaf is absolutely covered. Thinking about how leaves work and how they photosynthesize, the oil would probably block up a lot of their pores, their stomata, so they might not be able to exchange gas efficiently. Okay, we've got a pipette. We might be able to suck some of the oil out using the pipette. We can. We're sucking the oil out, but you can see we're also sucking quite a lot of the water out as well. So how could you use your string? How could you use your pipette? There's lots of different things to do here. So what I want you to try and do is think about, 1, how we could clean the water, 2, how we can rescue and clean our animals and plants as well, and also, would adding any chemicals help the problem or make the problem worse? So one thing we could use was a sort of detergent to see how that would react to our oil spill. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of washing up liquid and see if that does anything. Oh, wow. Wow, 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 wow. Look at that. Now, although the oil hasn't gone, it has dispersed it, okay, because the washing up liquid the water has surface tension. There's little bonds between each water molecule called hydrogen bonds. And what the washing up liquid does is that disperses that. It kind of breaks those hydrogen bonds to allow the surface tension to go. So although that didn't get rid of the oil, it's dispersed it. And if you could contain that in one place, that could be really useful. So your challenge, can you set up a habitat? Can you make some crude oil? And then finally, can you find a way to clear the crude oil from the water, from the plants, and from the animals? Okay. And once you've had a go at doing that, maybe do a little bit of research to see what and how these disasters have been tackled in the past and what things are being used. Good luck with this one, guys. I think this is a very tough challenge and a very important challenge to get us thinking about how and why we use crude oil, how we transport it, these disasters, and how we can kind of move forward in the future. How can we make this better? Do we need to use crude oil? It's going to run out at some point. What are the alternatives? Okay, how can we make a more sustainable future? I really look forward to seeing you guys cracking on with this challenge. This is probably one of my favourite challenges we've done so far. Thanks very much, guys. See you soon.